Okay, let's unpack this. We often look at the ordinary cow in a pasture, that classic image of quiet domesticity, and we really never consider the sheer depth of history it represents. Now, try to adjust your internal scale. What if that familiar animal was descended from a colossal, aggressive, wild beast, an ancestor standing nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, boasting horns so immense they measured nearly 3 feet long, and coiled like something from a mythological saga?
That animal is the aurochs, Bos primigenius. It is the extinct species of wild bovine that is the universal ancestor of virtually all modern domestic cattle on the planet today. And that covers everything from, the European dairy broods to the heat-tolerant zebu of India and Africa.
And today we're doing a deep dive into this creature's life, its inevitable death, and the incredible enduring genetic legacy it maintains centuries after its extinction. This isn't just about a prehistoric animal. It's about tracing the continuous thread of human civilization back to the moment we first chose to tame the wild.
And our sources for this deep dive are truly illuminating. Our mission is to trace the aurochs from its evolutionary origins, analyzing its vast global reach across 3 continents, and detailing its profound interaction, both violent and reverent, with ancient humans. We will then delve into the surprisingly complex story of its domestication, which happened not once but twice across 2 major continental landmasses, and finally track its heartbreaking disappearance.
And what truly anchors this story in the human timeline, making it so historically potent, is that simple, precise fact that the final known aurochs didn't vanish in some remote Ice Age wilderness. No, died relatively recently in a specifically managed royal forest in Poland in the year 1627. This historical overlap, this proximity to the Age of Enlightenment, tells us that the pressure we exerted on the wild world is not just a modern problem, but a centuries-old process. So, to understand the legacy, we have to start with the animal itself. Taxonomically, we are focused on Bos primigenius. Can we clarify the naming and categorization right out of the gate, especially given that it's the ancestor of all domestic cattle?
Certainly. The species was formally described by the German anatomist Ludwig Heinrich Bejanus in 1825, with the formal publication following in 1827. And the name Bos primigenius is critical.
What does it actually mean?
Well, the etymology is a direct link to its reputation. Both ar and or are ancient Germanic or Celtic root words, meaning wild ox. So the name essentially translates to the first or original wild ox.
Right. And speaking of nomenclature, I recall from the sources that there was some confusion historically about how to distinguish the wild species from the domestic one, Bos taurus.
That's right, and that's because the 2 interbred expensively, particularly during the early stages of European domestication, so there was ambiguity. However, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, the ICD-10, they made a crucial ruling in 2003.
What did they decide?
They formally placed Bos primigenius on the official list of specific names, definitively establishing it as the valid name for the wild ancestor. And this distinction is vital for researchers because it allows us to clearly separate the wild genetic profile from the domestic, which helps us trace back the origins of various cattle traits.
So it was an officially recognized distinctive species. And the core distinction, physically speaking, was just sheer, unapologetic size. This was absolutely a member of the Pleistocene megafauna.
Oh, absolutely. They were truly colossal, particularly the bulls of the northern European subspecies. A fully grown aurochs bull could reach a shoulder height of up to 1.8 meters, which is roughly 5 feet 11 inches.
Wow. To put that in perspective, the largest modern domesticated bull breeds, like a Charolais or something, they rarely get over 1.6 meters.
Exactly. The aurochs would have literally towered over them. And even the cows were large, reaching 1.55 meters, so about 5'1".
And the weight is just staggering.
Indeed. We're talking about powerful, dense animals. Estimates for some of the late Middle Pleistocene individuals, the older, larger specimens, suggested they could weigh up to 1,500 kilograms.
Which is over 3,300 pounds.
Mm-hmm. Contrast that with an average Holstein dairy cow, which typically weighs around, 700 to 800 kilograms. The aurochs was double the weight. It was a physical force that defined its ecosystem.
Was it simply a bulked-up version of a modern bull, or did its body shape really reflect its wild, aggressive nature? I'm thinking of a modern bison, with that very distinct, sloping, powerful profile.
The sources confirm the aurochs shared that same athletic distinction. It was not built for maximum beef yield.
Right, it was built for survival.
For survival and combat. A key feature was its long, slender legs, which meant its shoulder height nearly equaled its trunk length, giving it this exceptionally tall stance. And crucially, the bulls had profoundly expressed neck and shoulder musculature, making the forehand significantly larger and more robust than the rear.
So it had that powerful sloping profile, which is very different from the square, heavy, and often rear-dominant profile of most modern domestic breeds.
Exactly, because those have been bred for meat distribution. Even small details point to its wildness. The udder on the Aurochs cows was small and barely visible, designed only for the needs of the calf, not for human dairy harvesting.
That really emphasizes its role as a fighting, surviving animal. But the feature that made it an icon in Paleolithic art and later mythology has to be those massive horns. They must have been terrifying weapons.
They were the ultimate expression of its power. These weren't subtle antlers. They were immense keratinous sheaths, reaching up to 80 centimeters, or 31 inches in length. And the base diameter could hit 10 to 20 centimeters. The sources really emphasize the unique curvature. The horns emerged from the skull at a sharp, forward-facing 60-degree angle to the muzzle, and then they curved in this complex three-dimensional fashion upwards and outwards, then forwards and inwards, and finally inwards and upwards at the tips. This specific curvature is immediately recognizable in ancient depictions, and it gave the animal incredible leverage and striking power.
I remember seeing mention of some truly enormous horn cores in the sources.
Yes, the skeletal evidence is compelling. For example, the basal circumference of some horn cores reached 44.5 centimeters in the largest Chinese specimens, and an astonishing 48 centimeters in a French find. The sheer size meant these horns were not merely defensive, they were the defining characteristic of the male's prowess.
So we have sexual dimorphism in size, but did the sexes also look different in terms of coat color?
Absolutely, and this dimorphism is one of the most persistent genetic traits. The bulls were pitch black, often described as a pure, glossy black, and they were distinguished by a contrasting light eel stripe, a gray or pale streak running down the middle of the back.
And the cows.
The cows, however, retained a lighter reddish-brown color, which likely offered better camouflage in woodland environments. Both sexes shared a light-colored muzzle.
And that specific coloration is fascinating because it's precisely what we find recurring in so many primitive domestic breeds in southern Europe today.
It is. It's a direct, visible genetic echo of the wild ancestor.
That's the link that really makes this concrete. That tiny gray stripe, or the difference between the black bull and the red cow, is a living reminder of the 1,500-kilogram ancestor.
And if we follow that genetic link back into deep time, we see the evolutionary roots of the Bovini tribe, which includes all cattle and buffalo evolving around 11.7 million years ago. But the specific lineage of Bos, the genus of the Aurochs, diverged much, much later.
Right, so where exactly did this lineage take shape and how far back are we talking?
The Bos lineage split off roughly 2.5 to 1.65 million years ago. Now, there is still a debate regarding the species' ultimate geographic origin. You've got viable hypotheses suggesting either an African or an Asian start.
But is there a leading theory?
Well, the oldest securely dated fossil for the Aurochs species itself, Bos primigenius, dates to about 0.78 million years ago, and that was discovered in Tunisia's Kef Governorate. So this discovery tends to favor the hypothesis that the species evolved in Africa and then subsequently spread northward, migrating into Eurasia during the Middle Pleistocene epoch, a time of significant faunal exchange between the continents.
An ancient African origin then, followed by this massive global expansion. That kind of distribution, stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic, it inevitably leads to geographic isolation and the formation of distinct subspecies.
It does. And we recognize three primary historical subspecies, which reflect its immense historical distribution across continents. First, you had the Eurasian Aurochs, BP primigenius, which had the largest range and was the last to survive, existing in Eastern Europe until the 17th century.
Okay, that's one.
Second, the Indian Aurochs, BP pneumaticus, which populated the Indian subcontinent and became the exclusive ancestor of zebu cattle. And third, the North African Aurochs, BP mauritanicus, which lived north of the Sahara Desert.
That's a significant trifecta. But I noticed the sources also mention some emerging genetic evidence. It suggests we may need to reconsider East Asia as a fourth distinct group.
That's correct. And it highlights the ongoing nature of genetic discovery. Mitochondrial DNA analysis conducted by Chinese geneticists points strongly to an East Asian aurochs population, sometimes tentatively named BP sinensis, which was concentrated in northern China.
And what did that research show?
It showed that these populations were genetically isolated for extremely long periods during the Pleistocene. This suggests they developed independently enough from the Eurasian groups to warrant separate subspecies consideration, even if their external morphology often remained very similar to their European relatives.
It truly was a pan-global species then, stretching from the Gulf of Finland in the west all the way to Siberia, down through North Africa, and across to the Indian subcontinent. How did such a large animal maintain such a massive range through the dramatic climate changes of the Pleistocene?
The answer lies in adaptability and strategic retreat. The aurochs distribution was profoundly tied to the ebb and flow of ice ages. During warm interglacial periods, they thrived and spread widely across Europe. However, when the brutal glacial periods hit, they were forced to retreat south.
Into warmer pockets.
Exactly. Genomic analysis has consistently confirmed that they utilized warmer southern refugia, specifically the Iberian, Italian, and Balkan peninsulas, as biological shelters to survive the worst of the cold. This pattern of dispersal and retreat is key to understanding how they maintain genetic diversity across such a huge area.
And what specific environment did this grazer prefer? Was it built for the open steppes like a bison, or did it prefer denser cover?
The evidence suggests an impressive ecological flexibility. While they're often associated with the megafauna of the open plains, analysis shows they predominantly utilized riparian forests, so wetlands and woods along rivers and the edges of lakes.
That makes sense for post-glacial Europe, which was densely forested.
It does, but they also certainly inhabited open grasslands, using them for grazing when available.
I find the dietary analysis particularly insightful here, because it shows the extent of that flexibility wasn't just geographical, but behavioral.
It does. Studies of tooth wear, particularly on specimens from Denmark, demonstrated that their diet shifted over time. In the immediate post-glacial period, the pre-boreal, they were primarily abrasion-dominated grazers, focusing heavily on tough grasses.
But that changed.
Yes. Later in the Holocene, they transitioned into being mixed feeders. They were consuming a variety of grasses, but also acorns, bark, and twigs. This capability to adapt their diet based on available resources, a true mixed feeder strategy, was a major reason for their widespread success and longevity. Until, of course, human pressure began to restrict them severely to marginal forest boundaries and open country.
The aurochs wasn't just a part of the ecosystem. It was a defining figure in human culture, and this interaction began long before we ever thought about milking them. We are talking about interaction with archaic hominins hundreds of thousands of years ago.
That's where the narrative truly starts. The interaction began with Neanderthals. At the Biache-Saint-Vaast site in northern France, we have compelling evidence of butchery aurochs bones showing clear-cut marks and burn signs dating back 240,000 years. This shows they were a crucial food source, and it would have required sophisticated cooperative hunting techniques to bring one down.
But the relationship wasn't purely utilitarian, was it? There's evidence suggesting they were symbols of conquest, even for Neanderthals.
Exactly. The Cueva de Cubierta site in Spain is particularly provocative. Researchers there found evidence suggesting that Neanderthals kept the skulls of aurochs, possibly alongside red deer and bison, displayed in a way that implies they were potent hunting trophies, maybe even totemic objects.
A challenge, a conquest.
A physical embodiment of power.
And once our ancestors reached the Upper Paleolithic, the aurochs was immortalized in art, becoming a canvas for human awe. It's one of the most widely depicted animals in the great European caves.
The awe this massive creature inspired is unmistakable, preserved in charcoal and pigment. We see these magnificent dynamic depictions in the great French caves like Chauvet, dating back 36,000 years before present. Then later, at Lascaux, around 21,000 years BP, their representation is perhaps more stylized but equally dominating.
And it wasn't just Europe.
No. Petroglyphs depicting aurochs in Korda in the Upper Nile Valley date between 19,000 and 15,000 years BP, making them the oldest reliable engravings discovered in Africa to date.
It's the ultimate prehistoric status symbol, and that symbolism seems to have translated seamlessly into the birth of early civilizations in the Near East.
That reverence absolutely carried forward. In Mesopotamia, where early agriculture and empires flourished, the aurochs, known by the Akkadian terms Rimu and Romu, became the quintessential symbol of raw power, untamed masculine sexual potency, and military prowess.
So rulers would boast of hunting them.
Tiglath-Pileser, I did. But more importantly, it wasn't just an animal. It was an epithet used to describe the most powerful deities and legendary figures, including the storm god Enlil, the sun god Shamash, and the mythical hero Gilgamesh, who's often described as having the horns of an aurochs.
And the visual legacy is cemented in one of the most famous structures of the ancient world.
Precisely. The aurochs is depicted in striking relief on Babylon's Ishtar Gate, built during the 6th century BC. This public display, alongside dragons and lions, demonstrates its enduring, powerful association with the might and legitimacy of the ruling city.
Moving into classical antiquity, the Greeks and Romans continued this relationship, but perhaps with a slightly different emphasis. More on the trophy than the god.
The Greeks certainly focused on the conquest. They hunted aurochs not just for meat, but specifically for those monumental horns. These were highly prized as trophies, yes, but also repurposed into massive ceremonial drinking cups known as rhytons.
To drink wine from, symbolizing the conquest of the wild.
Exactly. We see this vividly in the famous Mycenaean Vaphio cup, which beautifully depicts the drama of an aurochs hunt, showing one bull mid-attack, throwing a hunter to the ground. That captures the violence and the prestige involved.
And the physical evidence of these trophies is remarkable.
It is. We have historical documentation, like the record that Philip V of Macedon offered a pair of aurochs horns measuring an incredible 105 centimeters or 41 inches in length to a temple dedicated to Hercules. This wasn't just a gift, it was a potent offering of supreme sacrifice and power.
Julius Caesar, ever the meticulous recorder, noted their presence when campaigning in Gaul. What was the Roman perspective on the aurochs?
Caesar wrote about them in his Commentary to Bello Gallico, noting their size and ferocity. For the Romans, the aurochs represented the wild, untamed nature of the territories they sought to conquer. They occasionally captured live aurochs, transporting them back to Rome to be featured in the Venatio shows, the staged animal hunts in amphitheaters like the Colosseum.
Right, to demonstrate Roman dominance over nature.
And over foreign lands. The enormous, aggressive aurochs was a perfect symbol for that purpose.
This high status persisted, even as the species began its decline, shifting into the Middle Ages, especially in the Eastern European territories where they held their final ground.
Their status only intensified. As the species grew rarer, hunting the aurochs ceased to be a general pursuit and became an exclusive, rigid privilege reserved solely for nobles and royals. It was an ultimate expression of aristocratic power.
And we see that echo in medieval literature, too.
Yes, the German heroic epic, the Nibelungenlied, features the hero Sigurd killing 4 aurochs, cementing its role as a monumental mythological opponent. Even in daily life, the memory persisted. Common expressions used in Eastern Europe described a drunken person as behaving like an aurochs, or referred to a physically imposing man as a bloke like an aurochs. The image was deeply embedded in the cultural psyche.
And we can't overlook the enduring artifact status of those horns.
Those horns were preserved and often highly ornamented, becoming treasured drinking vessels. In fact, the horn of the very last aurochs bull to die was documented as being preserved and used as a drinking horn. Politically, the aurochs head, often depicted with a star between its horns, became, and remains today, the official coat of arms of Moldavia. A powerful, centuries-old national symbol derived directly from this magnificent, extinct creature.
Okay, let's pivot now from the trophy and the symbol to the genetic core of the story, domestication. The aurochs is the sole ancestor of all modern cattle, but the truly remarkable insight here is that this was not one unified process. We have evidence of at least 2 major, entirely separate domestication events.
Yes, thousands of miles apart, which is complex for a single species. The complexity is key, and it fundamentally shaped the 2 great global cattle lineages. The first event, about 10,500 years ago during the Neolithic Revolution, gave rise to the taurine cattle, Bos taurus, which encompasses nearly all European, North American, and modern Asian breeds.
And where did that happen?
Genetic analysis indicates that this lineage arose from a surprisingly small founder population, estimated to be only about 80 aurochs tamed in the Fertile Crescent, specifically in southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria.
80 individuals, roughly. How do geneticists arrive at such a precise small number for the founding population? Why is that significant?
That number, derived from mitochondrial DNA analysis, represents the effective population size, the number of breeding females required to explain the observed genetic variation in modern cattle. And the small size, 80 females, it points to a very severe and specific genetic bottleneck at the moment of domestication. It suggests the process started with a tiny, isolated pool of tamed aurochs.
Which explains why modern taurine cattle have relatively low genetic diversity compared to their wild ancestors.
Precisely.
And the second major event.
That gave us the zebu cattle, Bos indicus, easily recognizable by the distinct hump on their shoulders. These arose from the local Indian aurochs, BP pneumaticus, and were domesticated slightly later, spanning the period of 10,000, 8,000 years ago in the Indian subcontinent. Early evidence for this separate domestication is found at Neolithic sites like Mehrgarh in Pakistan. The genetic divergence here is significant, confirming two independent paths from the wild aurochs to the domestic cow.
Once those two lineages were established, the story shifted from taming to mixing. As domestic herds spread and encountered the remaining wild aurochs populations, we see evidence of extensive gene flow, which scientists call introgression. Let's clarify that term.
Introgression is crucial here. While simple hybridization is the initial cross between two species, introgression specifically refers to the long-term flow of genes from one species into the gene pool of another through repeated back-crossing over multiple generations.
And this happened in Europe.
Massively. Between 9,500 and 1000 BC, wild male aurochs were clearly breeding with the early domestic taurine cows that settlers had introduced from the Near East. This constant influx of wild genes likely helped European domestic cattle adapt to new local pathogens and climates.
And this wasn't limited to Europe. We see African mixing too, right?
Yes. The initial taurine cattle arrived in Africa from the Near East, but before the zebu arrived, they hybridized extensively with the local wild African aurochs. This created adapted taurine African breeds. Then, later, the two domestic lineages, taurine and zebu, met.
When did the taurine and zebu lineages hybridize, and was there a driver for that mixing?
They hybridized significantly in the Near East about 4,000 years ago. And what's critical is that this period coincided precisely with the 4.2 kiloyear drought event, a major global climatic upheaval.
So climate change was the driver.
It seems so. The zebu's spread and its subsequent hybridization with taurine breeds introduced vital traits that were incredibly adaptable to hotter, drier, and more challenging arid environments. Zebu genes brought heat tolerance and likely resistance to certain tropical diseases, making the resulting hybrid cattle much more resilient.
And this historical introgression still has measurable effects in modern herds, correct? It's not just an ancient event.
Absolutely. Gene sequencing studies are constantly finding these continuous genetic connections. For instance, sequencing has shown that modern British and Irish cattle breeds still share specific genetic variants with the Eurasian aurochs. This is direct proof that introgression occurred locally with the wild British aurochs populations before they went extinct there, around 3,000 years ago.
And you can still see it in their appearance.
You can. The persistent exhibition of aurochs-like coat colors, the black bull reddish tie pattern, and the light eel stripe in primitive southern European breeds like Merboden cattle strongly suggest that sporadic localized introgression continued for millennia.
The scale of genetic divergence between the original aurochs groups before domestication tells us something important about their deep evolutionary history. How distinct was the Indian aurochs, for example?
Genetic analysis confirms that the Indian aurochs, BP pneumaticus, was the most genetically distinct of all aurochs populations. Comprehensive sequencing data reveals that this specific population split from the common ancestor shared by the European, Middle Eastern, and East Asian aurochs populations much earlier, around 300,000 to 166,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. This substantial divergence confirms the Indian subcontinent as a highly distinct evolutionary cradle, and it reinforces why the zebu lineage developed entirely separately from the taurine lineage.
As fascinating as its early history is, the story of the aurochs is ultimately a tragedy of extinction. It managed to survive the Ice Age, but it couldn't survive the rising pressure from humanity and our expanding agriculture.
That is the consensus view. While climate change initially dictated glacial retreats, the progressive contraction of the aurochs range during the last 10,000 years was a direct result of two primary human activities: habitat loss and excessive hunting pressure. We often see habitat loss defined broadly, but in Central Europe, the period between the 9th and 12th centuries was environmentally devastating for the aurochs.
How so? What was happening in that specific time frame?
That era saw the massive clear-cutting of large forest tracts across Central Europe, driven by agricultural expansion and the need for timber. This directly destroyed the preferred riparian, woodland, and forest edge habitats that the aurochs relied on. And as their habitat shrank and fragmented, the scattered populations became more vulnerable to hunting.
So even occasional hunting became an unsustainable pressure.
Exactly.
Let's track the extinction across the global groups. When did the Indian and African subspecies disappear?
For the Indian aurochs, the precise timing is murky. They likely succumbed during the Holocene, but distinguishing their late remains from those of early domesticated zebu cattle is difficult. Habitat loss combined with rampant interbreeding with the flourishing zebu herds likely erased the wild population before the historical period.
And the North African aurochs.
That's slightly clearer. The youngest reliable fossil remains date to around 6,000 years before present, though some experts argue based on limited evidence that small pockets might have survived near the Nile Delta well into the Roman era, but this is debated.
The Eurasian aurochs is the one we have the clearest timeline for, right up to the very last individual.
Yes, we can trace its western disappearance. It was extinct in Britain by approximately 3,000 years ago. Populations held on in regions like Hungary until the 13th century. By the close of the Middle Ages, the species was ecologically extinct across most of its former range, surviving only in pockets of Eastern Europe, primarily in Poland and Lithuania, where its hunting was strictly controlled by royal privilege.
And the final act took place in the Jaktaro forest. This is where the story shifts from large-scale natural history to a tragic, intimate historical record.
The Jaktaro Forest, a marshy woodland complex southwest of Warsaw, was the site of the species' final desperate holdout. The Polish crown actively managed this last herd, recognizing its uniqueness. Despite these efforts, the population plummeted rapidly due to habitat destruction and possibly disease spread from domestic cattle. Records show that the herd fell from around 50 individuals in the mid-16th century to just 4 individuals by 1601.
4 animals remaining, and then the final date.
The definitive end came in 1627 when the last remaining Aurochs cow died of natural causes within the confines of the Jaktaro Forest Preserve. It marked the global extinction of the species.
But there was a recent study that complicated this a bit, right?
That's right. A 2021 study complicated this single narrative by dating a horn core found in Sofia, Bulgaria, to the second half of the 17th or even early 18th century. So this suggests that a small population may have survived in northeastern Bulgaria slightly longer than the official Polish record indicates, though the 1627 Polish cow remains the widely recognized symbol of the final extinction.
Regardless of whether it was 1627 or a few decades later in Bulgaria, the aurochs was gone. But its absence didn't end the story. It initiated a movement to bring its physical form back. Tell us about the 20th century attempts at breeding back the aurochs.
This is where we transition into conservation history and genetic engineering. The effort to reverse the extinction, or at least recreate the phenotype, began in the 1920s, driven by the Heck brothers in Germany. Heinz Heck, working at Hellebrunn Zoo, initiated a selective breeding program. His goal was to select and cross specific primitive and rugged domestic cattle breeds, like the Spanish fighting bull, the Corsican cattle, and the large Chianina of Italy, to recreate an animal that looked like the aurochs.
And the result of that initial effort is known as Heck cattle. And these animals gained serious traction, particularly in ambitious rewilding projects later in the century.
This certainly did. Heck cattle were often used as living auroch surrogates to fulfill the ecological role of a large grazer. The most famous example is the Oostvaardersplassen Nature Reserve in the Netherlands, starting in the 1980s. The management philosophy there was a non-interference approach, attempting to mimic natural, prehistorical predator-prey dynamics in a contained area.
That non-interference approach, however, became highly controversial when the weather turned harsh.
It did. The controversy centered on animal welfare during extreme winter conditions. Because the reserve operated under a strict non-interference mandate, supplementary feeding was prohibited. When several cold winters struck, particularly in 2005 and 2010, large numbers of these Heck cattle died of starvation and exposure. Mortality rates sometimes reached 60% in a single season.
Wow. And that sparked a huge public debate.
An intense public and political debate, yes. It was about the ethics of allowing animals to suffer under the guise of natural regulation when the environment itself was not truly natural. It lacked the original large predators that would typically cull the weakest first.
So what was the outcome of that intense public scrutiny?
The ethical arguments eventually led to policy change. The Dutch government intervened, and the non-interference strategy was formally ended in 2018. The policy shifted to active management, including supplementary feeding in winter and culling weaker animals.
So if Heck cattle were only phenotypically similar, are modern projects trying to achieve something closer to a genetic match?
Absolutely. The scientific community recognized that simply breeding for an aurochs-like phenotype is insufficient. You need an aurochs-like genotype. Modern projects like the Taurus cattle program, the Tauros program, and the Urus project have moved beyond the original HEC breeding pool. They utilize contemporary genomic data, including sequences taken from ancient Aurochs bones, like a 6,750-year-old specimen sequence in England, to identify specific modern primitive breeds that retain the highest percentage of Eurasian Aurochs genetic markers.
So the goal is to create an animal that not only looks like the Aurochs, but also shares those critical genetic traits.
Exactly. To reclaim the original animal's full ecological role and resistance capabilities.
It's a complete narrative arc we've traced today. We started with Bos primigenius, a gigantic, wide-ranging species of the Pleistocene megafauna, revered by archaic hominins, immortalized in the cave art of Lascaux, and functioning as the ultimate symbol of power in the ancient Near East. We then tracked its role in two separate global domestication events that fundamentally underpin modern agriculture, giving rise to every taurine and zebu cow on the planet, leading ultimately to its final official extinction in a managed Polish forest in 1627.
The central takeaway is understanding the scale of this single species impact. The Aurochs' fate demonstrates the intense selection pressure human expansion places on the wild world. Yet, this extinct wild species is the genetic foundation for humanity's most essential domestic resource, our global meat and dairy supply. It highlights a deep, continuous, and often contradictory connection. We eradicated the magnificent wild ancestor only to rely entirely on its tamed descendants. The wild genes remain integrated, proving that even after the original form is gone, its influence is inescapable.
And this leads us to the final provocative thought. If ancient cultures revered the Aurochs as the ultimate symbol of power and used its massive horns as sacred drinking vessels and offerings to the gods, what does it truly say about our modern relationship with nature that we continue these extensive, sophisticated projects using genomic data and selective breeding to artificially breed back its physical form? What level of wildness, what lost environmental function do we truly seek to reclaim in the modern domestic animal? And what does that persistent desire for the original suggest about our regret over engineering its extinction in the first place?
So we're diving into the year 1826 today.
Okay.
And, if you just glance at a textbook timeline, you might think, you might think it's a bit of a quiet pause.
A filler year, almost.
Exactly, a filler year, stuck right between the Napoleonic Wars and the big European revolutions of 1830 and 48. But the sources we've looked at tell a completely different story.
A wildly different story. It's what you'd call the ultimate hinge year. It's a moment where these ancient empires, the ones relying on structures that were centuries old, they face this immediate, almost existential violence.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have engineers and mathematicians just laying the groundwork for the 20th century.
So our mission today is to sift through the snapshot of global events. We're looking at the treaties, the inventions, the scandals, and really trying to pinpoint those moments that changed everything, the wars that ended, the nations that were born.
And almost immediately tried to secede.
And the technology that just, fundamentally redefines how we even see the world, like the birth of photography.
And you really can't even start a conversation about 1826 without acknowledging this profound, almost unbelievable historical coincidence that anchors the year right here in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. I'm talking, of course, about July 4th, 1826.
The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Just a huge milestone on its own. But on that exact day, two of the absolute titans of the founding generation, two former presidents, rivals, friends, they both pass away.
Thomas Jefferson, the third president, he dies first. It's just before 1 p.m. at Monticello. He was 83.
And then his old political nemesis, who later became a close friend through letters, John Adams.
The second president. He follows him later that evening, around 6:20 p.m. up in Quincy, Massachusetts. He was 90.
50 years to the day.
To the day.
I mean, even if you're the most hardened skeptic, you have to admit that alignment is just, it's stunning.
It is. The two men who really epitomized the entire American project. Their relationship went from collaboration to bitter rivalry, and then back to this deep friendship.
And they depart at the precise historical moment they created together. It instantly framed 1826, at least in America, as the end of an era, the end of the heroic age.
And that sense of finality, the passing of titans, it sets the perfect context for everything else that was happening globally that year. Because if the new world was losing its founders, the old world was desperately trying to hold itself together, often with extreme violence.
Okay, so let's unpack that global instability. And we have to start with the entity that was just fundamentally redrawing the map in 1826, the British Empire.
Right. Specifically, its relentless march across Asia.
The sources show Britain basically finalizing its control in two really crucial theaters that year.
They do. The first, and maybe the most impactful for Southeast Asia, was the end of the First Anglo-Burmese War.
And that ends formally on February 24th with the signing of the Treaty of Yandabo.
And what's significant isn't just that the war was over, but the sheer size of the territorial grab.
What are we talking about? How much land?
Under the treaty, Britain gets these massive tracts of land. We're talking Assam, Manipur, Rakhine.
Wow.
These weren't small territories. This was a foundational act for the future geography of the entire region.
So this is more than just lines on a map.
Oh, it's way more. It's resource control. It's strategic depth. Getting Assam, for example, that opened up huge new areas for commercial exploitation.
Like the tea trade.
Exactly. The tea trade, which becomes this absolute staple of British economic power. This one treaty really sets the stage for the rest of the 19th century map of, well, what we now call Myanmar and Northeast India.
And at the same time, if you track that expansion west toward the Indian subcontinent, the British East India Company is doing the same thing, but through direct military force.
Right. Which brings us to the siege of Bharatpur in January.
That was January 18th.
It was.
Yeah.
And the British forces, led by Lord Combermere, they win a decisive victory over the princely state of Bharatpur in modern-day Rajasthan.
And this wasn't just some minor skirmish, was it?
Not at all. Bharatpur was a powerful local kingdom, and their fortress, it was legendary. It had historically resisted British attacks before.
So this victory sends a message.
A huge one. It signaled that even the most formidable local resistance, even with impressive fortifications, it just couldn't hold up against the superior engineering and coordinated tactics of the company. It took a major piece off the board for British control in the heartland of India.
Okay, so you have Britain actively expanding, securing wealth. Now let's look across to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire.
Which was going through an internal crisis that was arguably more dramatic, more self-destructive than any external war.
You're talking about the event known as the Auspicious Incident.
Yes, in Istanbul. And the name, it sounds almost deliberately ironic.
Because it was basically a massacre, a bloody massacre aimed at, what, military self-renewal.
Pretty much. This all went down on June 14th and 15th. Sultan Mahmud II just utterly crushes the final mutiny of the Janissary Corps.
And this is a historical earthquake. You have to explain who the Janissaries were to really get the scale of this.
You do. They weren't just soldiers. For over 400 years, they were the elite standing infantry of the Ottoman Empire. They were the backbone of its military power.
And they were politically powerful, too.
Immensely. They were fiercely conservative, and they had a history of deposing sultans who dared to propose any kind of modernization or Western-style reform.
A state within a state. Kingmakers who were violently resistant to change.
Exactly. So when Mahmud II decides he can't modernize the empire with them, he chooses to just wipe them out.
How does he do it?
It was ruthless and very well coordinated. He'd been carefully building up a loyal artillery corps. So when the Janissaries mutinied in their barracks,
As they had done before.
He declared them rebels against the Prophet, which stripped them of any religious legitimacy. Then he just brought in the artillery and shelled their barracks.
Wow.
Thousands were killed in the fighting, and then in the days after, there were mass executions of any surviving leaders.
The fallout is what's key. It was immediate.
Right away. The Sultan's Council doesn't just dissolve the corps. They immediately order the remaining forces to drill in the European manner.
That single order says everything, doesn't it?
It symbolizes the desperation. Adopt the military methods of your rivals, or you will collapse. It was a violent, forced attempt to catch up.
But while the Sultan is dealing with his internal enemies, he's still losing a desperate fight in the Balkans.
The Greek War of Independence. And 1826 marks a real tragedy in that struggle.
That would be the end of the Third Siege of Missolonghi. It fell in April.
And the sources detail this horrific massacre of thousands of Greek defenders. They tried a desperate breakout, and it was just crushed by the Ottoman and Egyptian forces.
But Missolonghi became more than a military defeat, didn't it? It became a symbol.
A powerful one.
Oh.
It was a huge piece of propaganda for the Greek cause across Europe. It fueled this movement called Philhellenism, romantic, political, financial support for Greek independence.
So this event accelerates external pressure on the Ottomans, even as the Sultan is trying to fix his military at home.
Precisely. And right after this, the Ottoman-Egyptian invasion of Mani kicks off in June, showing the war for Greece was just escalating and getting even more brutal. So you see this perfect contrast, Britain expanding and seizing new land.
While the Ottomans are attempting this radical, self-inflicted surgery just to stay in the game. Okay, let's pivot from these ancient empires to the New World. The challenge there wasn't holding on to power, it was figuring out how to stop newly won independence from just shattering into pieces.
And the entire region was just this flurry of foundational instability.
Right, so south of the equator, you have formal state building going on.
You do. Bernardino Rivadavia becomes the first president of the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata.
Which is basically modern Argentina. That was on February 8th.
So that's the formal creation of a major republic, but it's built on incredibly shaky ground. It's facing immediate internal disputes.
But the grandest ambition of the year, maybe the most impossible one, came from Simon Bolivar.
Oh, absolutely. He convenes the Congress of Panama, which starts on June 22nd. This was a truly visionary attempt.
What was the ultimate goal?
It was Bolivar's great, doomed dream to unify all the newly independent republics of Spanish America into one massive confederation for common defense, for stability, to resist any potential European reconquest. It was Pan-Americanism, centuries ahead of its time.
And it fails spectacularly fast. It lasts less than a month. What went wrong?
Well, the speed of the failure tells you everything. First, just basic logistics. Distance and communication were monumental problems. Delegates traveled for months. The delegation from the U.S., which Bolivar invited, didn't even get there in time.
And I imagine local interests were stronger than some grand ideal of unity.
Much stronger. You had these powerful local leaders, the caudillos, and competing regional interests. Gran Colombia, Mexico, Peru. They'd already developed their own distinct identities and, frankly, their own rivalries.
So the Congress adjourns by July 15th, and the Federation never happens.
Right. It proves that while revolution can unite you against a common enemy, actually building a stable nation requires infrastructure and trust that just set in haven't there yet.
And if continental fragmentation wasn't enough drama, we also get this almost comical preview of American expansion.
The Fredonian Rebellion in Mexican Texas.
This sounds like something out of a movie. It happened in December. American settlers just decide to secede from Mexico and form their own country.
The Republic of Fredonia. And the leader, again in Benjamin W. Edwards, declares himself the ruler.
How long did that last?
Less than 6 weeks. The sheer audacity of it is what stands out. These are brand new settlers, and they're already rejecting the government that let them in. They were crushed, obviously. But it's this little footnote that tells you so much about the direction U.S.-Mexico relations are headed.
And you contrast that chaotic settler ambition with the cold, calculated efficiency of the British.
While these republics are trying to figure themselves out, the British are just drawing new lines on the map.
The sources point to two big administrative moves. First, the founding of the Straits Settlements Colony.
Right. This was the British East India Company creating a unified system for their territories on the Malay Peninsula. Penang, Malacca, and the big one, Singapore.
So this wasn't about seizing new land, it was about organizing what they already had.
Exactly. It was about streamlining governance, securing these critical maritime choke points. It's imperial consolidation at its most efficient.
And then, far to the south,
Major Edmund Lockyer arrives at King George Sound to formally take possession of the western part of Australia. He sets up a settlement near what's now Albany.
So they're claiming the West Coast?
And they're doing it to preempt any potential French claims. It just completes the picture for this whole section. A world where the maps are being redrawn daily, either by aggressive British seizure, violent Ottoman self-reform, or these messy, often failed attempts by new republics to define themselves.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. If that was the political world unraveling, now we get to the physical world being fundamentally rebuilt. We're moving from military strategy to iron, stone, and the revolutionary power of steam.
This is where we really see the Industrial Revolution hitting its stride. And the most visible icon of this shift in 1826 has to be the opening of the Menai Suspension Bridge on January 30th.
Thomas Telford's masterpiece. This wasn't just a bridge, it was an engineering statement.
A huge one. It connected the island of Anglesey to mainland Wales, which was critical for communication and commerce, especially military mail going to Ireland. But the technological leap is the real story.
Your sources highlight this as the first major suspension bridge in world history.
The first. Before this, large gaps like the Menai Strait were just impassable for regular traffic. The technical challenge was immense. It's a wide tidal channel.
And Telford did it with these massive iron chains.
Right, transferring the load to these huge stone towers. It just proved that human ingenuity, combined with new advances in iron production, could conquer these previously insurmountable natural obstacles. It's truly an icon of the age. And while Telford is conquering the skies with bridges, others are conquering the land with rail.
May 5th, 1826, we get the critical parliamentary authorization for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway.
And this is one of the most historically significant pieces of legislation of the era. This line, designed by George Stephenson and Joseph Locke, was destined to be the world's first.
The first purpose-built intercity passenger railway operated entirely by steam locomotives.
Exactly. This is the official green light for the steam-powered future of human travel.
What's often forgotten is the political battle to even get this approved.
Oh, it was a huge fight. The great canal owners of England opposed it fiercely. They saw the railway as a direct threat to their monopoly on freight. Stephenson and Locke had to fight tooth and nail in Parliament to prove the superiority of rail, not just for goods, but for people.
It's the vision that's so important. They were planning a future where travel wasn't limited by a horse or the wind, but by mechanized speed. But what I find fascinating is to contrast this future-looking plan with what was actually happening on the ground that year.
That's the critical link. The rail revolution wasn't just theory. On October 1st, the Monkland and Kirkintilloch Railway opens in Scotland.
And then, just 6 days later in the U.S., the first train runs on the Granite Railway in Massachusetts.
Right. And the Granite Railway is so interesting because it shows the immediate practical application of the technology. It wasn't about passengers or connecting big cities.
No, it was designed purely to haul massive blocks of stone from a quarry down to the water.
Specifically to build the Bunker Hill Monument. It proved the commercial viability of rail for bulk materials, heavy stuff that canals struggled with. And that practical success provided the commercial proof that funded the massive, futuristic vision of Stephenson's passenger railway.
And to round out this infrastructure boom, construction starts on the huge Rideau Canal in Canada in September.
Another massive project to secure British military supply lines. So you have bridges, railways, and canals all being launched or built in 1826. It's an explosion.
But the physical world wasn't the only thing changing. This pace was mirrored by an equally dramatic acceleration in scientific discovery.
Absolutely. Let's start with a foundational step for future power. On April 1st in the U.S., Samuel Morey patents an internal combustion engine.
This is one of those precursors that often gets missed, but it's so critical.
It is. While steam is king in 1826, Morey's already thinking past it. He's trying to harness the power of combustion inside a cylinder. That patent is a quiet nod toward the world of gasoline-powered cars to come.
Then you have foundational chemistry. Otto Unverdorben isolates aniline.
Right, by using the destructive distillation of indigo.
And aniline is now vital for dyes, synthetic rubber, pharmaceuticals.
At the time, this was a major leap in early organic chemistry. It showed that science was moving beyond just, alchemy toward real industrial application.
But if we're talking about changing the fundamental structure of thought itself, we have to talk about mathematics.
Nikolai Ivanovich Lobachevsky, the Russian mathematician. In 1826, he develops non-Euclidean geometry.
And this is a monumental intellectual earthquake. For 2,000 years, since Euclid, geometry operated on 5 basic axioms.
And the fifth one, the parallel postulate, seemed just obvious. Through a point not on a given line, only one parallel line can be drawn.
And Lobachevsky said, what if that's not true?
Exactly. He showed you could build an entirely logical, self-consistent geometry where that postulate was false. A geometry where multiple parallel lines can be drawn. And what's wild is he did this independently of another mathematician, Janos Bolyai. The idea was just in the air.
It's the moment we began to realize that physical reality might not conform to the intuitive rules we thought it did. It literally paved the way for Einstein's curved space-time a century later.
And speaking of fundamentally redefining how we see the world, we get to the absolute birth of the visual record.
Nicephore Niepce in France. He makes what we now recognize as the first photograph.
View from the window at Le Gras. And what the sources emphasize is that it's the oldest known surviving photograph.
Just think about the impact of that. This image. It was captured using a camera obscura and a light-sensitive plate. The exposure probably took hours.
Right, making all blurry. But the result was indisputable. It's the moment light was first permanently captured by a chemical process.
Every single image we see today, every news photo, every movie, every selfie, it all traces its lineage back to this one moment in 1826. It's a watershed moment for art, for science, for history.
And you see this perfect synergy.
Yeah.
Lobachevsky proves space is conceptually flexible, while Niepce gives us the tool to permanently record what space actually looks like. Reality is being questioned and documented at the same time.
So this section closes with a look at high culture, specifically music, where we find the final brilliant gasp of one titan and the energetic debut of a young genius.
Ludwig van Beethoven. He premiered his string quartet No. 13, Opus 130, in March. And Beethoven by this time is profoundly deaf, just completely immersed in composition, pushing the absolute limits of music.
And there's a fascinating story here about the final movement, the infamous Gross Fugue.
The Great Fugue. It was so complex, so dense, and so difficult for both the performers and the audience that his publisher basically begged him to write a new, more conventional finale.
Wow.
Which he did. It just shows Beethoven at the end of his life, intellectually light years ahead of his audience, experimenting with forms that wouldn't be fully appreciated for another 100 years.
And just a few months later, he finishes String Quartet No. 14, which many critics call the jewel in the crown of his late string quartets.
It's the twilight of a genius. But that light is immediately picked up by another. On August 6th, a 17-year-old Felix Mendelssohn completes the overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream.
17 years old.
17. And while Beethoven is struggling with these complex, challenging late works, Mendelssohn produces this piece of just, crystalline clarity and mature structure. It introduced that magical high-speed writing that would help define the Romantic period.
So in 1826, you literally have the baton being passed. The greatest musical revolutionary is completing his most profound work, while a new genius announces his arrival. We've covered revolutions in geometry, architecture, and music. Now we get to dive into the sheer human drama, the bizarre, the mysterious, and the outright shocking events of 1826.
And we have to anchor ourselves one last time in that profound political coincidence. The death of Adams and Jefferson on July 4th. It wasn't just a fact. It became a powerful national story.
The young nation just seized on it. It felt like divine sanction for the Declaration, as if God himself waited for the 50th anniversary to call them home.
It gave the Republic this immediate historical weight, a sense of closure, just as it was entering a new political era.
But let's go across the Atlantic, where we find drama of a much more treacherous kind. A king's death that wasn't properly solved for nearly 2 centuries.
Dom Juan VI, King of Portugal. He dies on March 10th under very suspicious circumstances. It triggers an immediate succession crisis in both Portugal and Brazil.
And the suspicion was warranted, right?
As it turns out, yes. Your sources point out this amazing piece of retroactive justice. An investigative autopsy was done 174 years later.
So around the year 2000.
Exactly. And they discovered he'd been killed by arsenic poisoning.
That is genuinely shocking, a successful regicide that stayed a cold case for almost 200 years.
And his son, Pedro I of Brazil, has to sail across the ocean, briefly become King Pedro IV of Portugal, then abdicate in favor of his daughter to try and stabilize everything. It's just a perfect showcase of the volatile succession politics of European monarchies.
Now, switching from royal drama to financial ruin, 1826 was a disaster for one of the biggest literary figures of the era,
Sir Walter Scott.
On January 17th, the Ballantine printing business in Edinburgh collapses, and it ruins him completely.
He was a principal partner and investor. The financial hole was immense, over £100,000, which is tens of millions in modern terms. But what's incredible is what he did next.
He made a public promise.
A firm one. That he would repay every penny of his debts solely from the profits of his future writings.
And that decision fueled years of furious, dedicated writing. He literally wrote his way out of ruin. It's an act of just profound personal integrity.
Now, for the truly sensational stuff, the scandals that everyone was talking about, we have a kidnapping that captivated the public.
The kidnapping of Ellen Turner, a wealthy 15-year-old heiress.
Right. She was abducted by a man named Edward Gibbon Wakefield, who tried to force her into marriage to get his hands on her fortune.
The marriage was later declared null and void, and he went to prison.
We did, for 3 years. But the key detail for us is what happens after. Wakefield, this notorious criminal, later becomes a highly influential political figure in the colonization of New Zealand.
That's a fascinating and kind of disturbing link. It shows how these figures from major scandals in Britain could just reinvent themselves as leaders in the colony.
And then there's the truly mysterious case, that actually triggered a political movement.
The disappearance of William Morgan, an anti-Mason from Batavia, New York.
Morgan was about to publish a book exposing the secrets of the Masonic Society. He vanishes on September 13th.
And there were reports.
Deeply concerning ones. That a man who looked like Morgan was tied up and thrown into the Niagara River after a clandestine Masonic meeting. His body was never conclusively identified, but the public believed he'd been murdered by high-ranking Masons to silence him.
And the consequence was massive.
Huge. The outrage directly sparked the anti-Masonic movement, which became a serious political force in the U.S., running candidates for state and national office, all from one alleged crime.
And finally, we have to touch on two truly bizarre incidents. First, the riot over Christmas eggnog.
The eggnog riot. It breaks out at West Point, the U.S. military academy, on Christmas morning.
What happened?
Cadets were forbidden from drinking, but they smuggled in a ton of whiskey to spike their holiday eggnog. When officers tried to intervene, a full-scale brawl erupted. Swords, furniture, total chaos. It led to a lot of court-martials.
A moment of wonderfully absurd humanity.
And a much grimmer story. The fate of Chunee, the Indian elephant in London.
Oh, this is a tough one.
Chunee had been a popular attraction for years, but he ran amok and killed a keeper.
And the tragic part is the response. They had no way to humanely put down an animal that large.
None. They tried arsenic, they tried shooting him with muskets.
Yeah.
It didn't work. In the end, soldiers had to stab the animal to death over a prolonged period. It's just this grim snapshot of the primitive methods they had for dealing with exotic animals in these new urban centers.
So to round this all out, a few cultural and commercial footnotes that really set the stage for the future.
On January 15th, the French satirical weekly Le Figaro is founded in Paris, and it's famously still being published today.
We also see commerce getting more formalized. The Paris Stock Exchange opens at the Palais de la Bourse in November.
A necessary step to manage the capital that was fueling the industrial age.
And a dark historical endpoint. Cayetano Ripoll is executed on July 26th.
And he was the last person to be executed by the Spanish Inquisition's successor at its final auto de fe. It's the last gasp of one of history's most repressive institutions.
And finally, the turnover of the intellectual guard continues.
We see the births of the great mathematician Bernhard Riemann, Carlo Collodi, who would one day write Pinocchio, and the foundational American songwriter Stephen Foster.
And as they're being born, we see the departure of pioneers who shaped the previous century. Joseph Proust, the chemist, Stamford Raffles, the founder of Singapore, Joseph von Fraunhofer, the optician. The cycle just continues.
So when we step back and pull all of this together, 1826 really reveals itself not as a pause, but as a year of just intense parallel transformation.
Absolutely. On one hand, you have the world grappling with the deaths of foundational figures like Adams and Jefferson. That provides the sense of historical closure.
And at the same time, you see the violent internal cleansing of ancient military structures, like the Janissaries, signaling that the rules of warfare were irrevocably changing.
But running right alongside all that political drama was this quiet, determined emergence of a new reality.
Non-Euclidean geometry proves that our basic understanding of space was flawed, while Nicephore Niepce proves that light itself could be captured forever with the photograph. Reality was being redefined, both conceptually and visually.
It's a year where high culture Beethoven, completing his final, most challenging works, existed right next to this immediate shocking drama.
The sublime, right next to the shocking, the king's murder by arsenic, the kidnapping of Ellen Turner, the brutal killing of Chunee the elephant. The sheer complexity of human experience in that one year is enormous.
And geopolitically, we saw these new political structures trying to take hold. Nations like Argentina were founded.
But that process was immediately undermined by internal struggles and these reckless secession attempts, like the Republic of Fredonia, which failed in weeks. The map was being redrawn with frantic speed.
That density of history, the sheer amount of foundational change packed into 1826, it really makes you pause and wonder, what must it have felt like to live in a time when the basic assumptions about travel, empire, warfare, even math were all collapsing and being rebuilt at once?
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. We focused on 1826 as a foundational year, a time of pivots. So if we apply that lens forward and look back 174 years from now to our own lifetime, what single event from the last few decades might be seen as the most truly foundational moment for the world of, say, 2198?
The moment we are currently living through, that will one day be seen as the moment the old world ended and the new one truly began. Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive into 1826. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of source material articles, biographies, and deep research and turn them into instantaneous, essential knowledge for you.
And today, our mission. It's a big one.
It's arguably the single most important deep dive we could do into the art of performance. We are uncovering the foundational system that underpins almost every successful actor, director, and screenwriter working today.
Even if they don't know its name.
Exactly, whether they know it or not.
It's the water they swim in. We are diving into the comprehensive, systematic approach developed by the Russian theatrical visionary Konstantin Stanislavski.
Right.
His system transformed acting from, a career of external posing and just declaiming lines into a meticulous craft of psychological truth.
And as one of the writers we looked at put it, his ideas have become so pervasive, so accepted, that they're simply common sense now.
Right.
But if we pull back the curtain, we find a complex, evolving methodology. What is the fundamental goal of the system, at its core?
The goal, simply put, is repeatable truthfulness. And it's crucial to understand that Stanislavski's work is not static. It's an evolution spanning decades.
Oh.
The core mechanism is a little counterintuitive. It mobilizes the actor's conscious thought, their will, their intellect, the things they can control.
Logical parts of the brain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
In order to indirectly activate those processes that are usually uncontrollable. Things like genuine emotion, inspiration, and subconscious behavior.
So if I can't simply will myself to cry on cue 8 times a week,
Which you can't.
I use a conscious technique to open the door for that subconscious emotion to arrive organically.
That is the perfect way to put it. We are tracing how he moved theater from the art of representation, which involves just showing or illustrating an emotion,
Faking it.
to the art of experiencing. And that art of experiencing is the pursuit of psychological realism, where the actor truly lives the character's inner life, feeling feelings analogous to the role every single time.
That sounds exhausting.
It's an exhausting yet necessary pursuit for truth.
To really appreciate the magnitude of this revolution, we have to start at the beginning. What was the world of Russian theater like before Stanislavski and Vladimir Nemirovich Danchenko co-founded the Moscow Art Theater, the MET, in 1898? Our sources paint a picture of just utter artistic decay.
Artistic decay is charitable. It was a mess.
Well, a mess. Okay.
Stanislavski's biographer, Jean Benedetti, he gives us these almost satirical accounts of the standard practice. For starters, the script itself meant less than nothing.
Wow.
It was treated as a loose suggestion rather than a sacred text. And because the actors often didn't bother to truly learn their lines, a prominent feature of the stage was the prompter's box.
Ah, the omnipresent prompter.
Yes, if you were a star, your job was simply to plant yourself downstage center, as close to the prompter's box as possible, making sure you never missed your cue.
So they were just being fed their lines live on stage.
Exactly. You would wait for the line, deliver it straight at the audience in a ringing declamatory voice, and then give a fine display of passion and temperament. It was all spectacle.
That sounds like a zero-sum game for actual dramatic interaction. I mean, if everyone is focused on shouting their lines into the orchestra pit, how did they manage scene work?
They didn't. They really didn't. Direct, believable communication with other actors was minimal. There was no sense of ensemble, no genuine human exchange.
So no one's even looking at each other.
Rarely. Stage managers, accommodating these, presentational stars, would often arrange the furniture chairs, tables, settees, specifically so that when the actor sat down, they would still be facing the front.
Facing the audience.
Instead of facing each other. It was an external, purely presentational, and frankly, very tired form of theatrical practice.
So the MET, from its inception, was a direct institutional revolt against this vacuum of truth. They set out to achieve organic unity and realism, and they succeeded almost immediately, right?
They did.
The early productions of Chekhov, particularly The Seagull, were international sensations.
They were instant successes, but here's the crucial detail that often gets overlooked.
What's that?
Those initial successes were achieved without the formal system we study today. They were director-driven triumphs, not actor-driven ones. Stanislavski was functioning primarily as a meticulous, controlling director in the early years.
So how did that manifest in the rehearsal room? What did that look like?
He was a master planner. He would meticulously plan the interpretation of every role, the detailed physical blocking, and the entire mise-en-scène, the arrangement of everything on stage, completely in advance.
So he was a dictator, in a way.
A benevolent one, maybe?
Yeah.
He forced his company into unprecedented discipline and precision, And the groundbreaking result was an organic unity of all stage elements. The sound design, the setting, the lighting, the movement, it all worked together.
Which was revolutionary.
It was, but it meant the actors were still, in essence, brilliant puppets following external instructions.
The actors were reacting truthfully to the environment, but they didn't have a repeatable methodology for generating truthful inner impulses.
And you've got it.
So, if the Chekhov plays were smash hits and achieving this new level of naturalism, why was Stanislavski still dissatisfied? This dissatisfaction is the true catalyst for the system, isn't it?
It is the moment everything pivots. The problem wasn't external staging, it was the psychological depth. Stanislavski struggled profoundly with Chekhov's drama.
Because it's so subtle.
It's so subtle.
Yeah.
Chekhov's plays, unlike the grand tragedies or melodramas of the past, are quiet. They deal with the internal, unspoken lives of ordinary people. How do you direct an actor to truthfully convey that they're saying one thing, but thinking, wanting, or feeling something completely different?
That silent internal conflict.
Exactly. This struggle forced Stanislavski to invent the notion of subtext, what the character is really saying or intending beneath the surface of the dialogue.
And that changed everything for him.
It shifted his entire focus from external direction to interaction and what he called psychological realism. He realized that meticulous blocking could produce a beautiful external picture, but without an internal, repeatable technique for the actor to access the character's soul, that picture was fundamentally empty and unreliable.
So he realized the director couldn't force inner truth. The actor had to generate it themselves. That's the dividing line between the old way and the system.
It is the birth of the system, right around 1909, just after his artistic crisis of 1906. And it didn't come from a vacuum. It was a brilliant synthesis of existing European theatrical ideas.
Okay, let's run those down because they show the complexity of his research.
First, he drew on the Meiningen Company from Germany. They emphasized a director-centered, unified aesthetic demanding extreme discipline and ensemble commitment from the entire cast. He took their rigor.
Okay, what else?
Second, he incorporated the Malay theater tradition, which was known for its actor-centered realism. It emphasized developing believable, three-dimensional characters rooted in observation.
And the third influence.
The naturalistic staging principles established by André Antoine and the independent theater movement in Paris. Antoine was famous for breaking the fourth wall and focusing on detailed, realistic environments.
Right.
Stanislavski took that commitment to a believable environment, but aimed the focus inward. The formal system appears around 1909, marking his decisive shift to actor training methodology.
It sounds like Stanislavski essentially turned his own acting company into a laboratory to solve the problem of Chekhov. Did the actors embrace this new focus on psychological depth and exhaustive internal work?
Not initially, no. The sources mention significant resistance, even from established mad actors like Olga Chekhov's wife, who resented being used as a test subject for these, invasive psychological experiments during the rehearsal of A Month in the Country.
They felt it was too much.
They felt the internal detailed analysis was excessive and time-consuming.
But he persisted, seeing it as the only path to consistency.
Absolutely. By 1911, he insisted, and the AMA officially adopted his methodology as their standard rehearsal technique. It was a matter of securing a repeatable, dependable process. Before the system, great acting was like accidental genius.
Right, lightning in a bottle.
Stanislavski wanted to codify genius into a reliable method that every serious actor could master.
Okay, let's move into the nuts and bolts of the technique itself, which centers on that concept. Experiencing the role. You mentioned earlier that this is a highly demanding requirement.
It is.
Let's expand on that definition. The actor must experience feelings analogous to those of the character each and every time they perform.
This is the revolutionary and very controversial demand. It asks the actor to genuinely feel at the moment of performance. It wasn't just preparatory work, it was the performance itself.
And he was fighting against the established wisdom on this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Stanislavski framed this argument by contrasting himself directly with two giants of the 19th century stage. His opponent was the influential French actor Constant Coquelin, who argued for the art of representation.
Okay, and what was that?
Coquelin claimed that the actor should only feel the emotion during the preparatory phase. During the performance, they should rely on skill, technique, and cold calculation to reproduce the external appearance of the emotion.
That seems like the more rational, perhaps safer approach.
It is, but Stanislavski rejected it as emotionally shallow. He sided firmly with the Italian tragedian Tommaso Salvini, whom he deeply admired. Salvini insisted that actors must genuinely experience the feelings anew at every performance, whether it was the first time or the thousandth.
So what does experiencing truly mean in the system? Does it mean the actor has to be genuinely devastated every night when playing a tragedy?
Not necessarily genuine devastation, but genuine credible action. Stanislavski defines it as thinking, wanting, striving, and behaving truthfully in a logical sequence in a human way within the character and in complete parallel to it.
You have to feel as one with the role.
Exactly. The whole point of the system is to stimulate the actor's will to create that inner life afresh, using conscious techniques to activate those subconscious emotional processes indirectly.
And he coined the term psychotechnique for the training exercises supporting this inner work. This sounds like an intensive psychological deep dive before they even touch the script.
It was. Psychotechnique was about cultivating a rich, believable psychological history for the character, often by creating scenes that weren't even written by the playwright.
Like that example from The Cherry Orchard.
Exactly. His 1905 letter to Vera Kotlyarskaya concerning her role as Charlotta.
Charlotta is a sad, eccentric governess, a relatively small, strange role.
Right. And to build her inner life, he told Kotlyarskaya to shut herself off and improvise highly specific, non-Chekhovian scenes. He suggested she imagine Charlotta being dismissed and trying to find new employment, maybe in a circus.
Or a cafe.
Or, this is critical, he advised her to try to make her weep sincerely over her life.
A sincere weep over a life that is completely invented, that's powerful. Why impose these fictional external events?
Because Stanislavski wanted to explore the character's psychological range and capacity for genuine emotion. By forcing the actor to commit to these invented circumstances, they discover the character's emotional truth. He concluded, through such an image, you will discover the whole range of notes you need.
So by the time you get on stage, your character is a fully formed person.
Exactly. Their inner life is so rich that even a simple line carries the weight of all that personal history.
That moves us perfectly to the tools the actor uses to bridge their own internal world with the requirements of the script, given circumstances and the magic if. Let's start with the imaginative engine.
That's the magic if. It's the foundational trigger for internal belief. It demands the actor ask, what would I do if I found myself in these circumstances?
Note the emphasis on the I.
It's always the I. The actor is always the self, not a costume. Stanislavski stated that when the actor gives a genuine answer to the if, there is no character, only me.
Wait, that's where an outsider might worry about narcissism. If the actor focuses only on themselves, how do they serve the playwright's vision and the defined role?
That's the genius of the pairing with the given circumstances. The circumstances are the non-negotiable details provided by the playwright, the director, the designers, the setting, the historical period, the specific dramatic situation, the relationships.
All the facts of the story.
All the facts.
Yeah.
The magic if allows the actor to live their own personal psychological life within that specific fictional container.
So it's not I am Hamlet, which is psychologically impossible, but if I, with my own brain and motivations, were a Danish prince whose uncle just murdered his father and married his mother, what would I do next?
Exactly. That reframes the problem from external invitation to internal personal action. Stanislavski strongly warned against the common pitfall. Placing oneself in the role does not mean transferring one's own external reality onto the play. It means the actor must fully incorporate and react truthfully to the circumstances other than one's own. You keep your mind, but you adopt the prison, the palace, or the poverty of the role.
And when this imaginative engine is running perfectly, the actor achieves that state of total immersion.
Yes, the state Stanislavski called I am being. It is a deep, almost meditative absorption in the fictional world, what modern psychologists might call a state of flow.
And he had techniques for that too.
He did. To achieve this, the actor must eliminate external distractions, the lights, the crew, the audience. He taught two core techniques for this, public solitude and circles of attention.
Public solitude, the paradox of being alone while exposed to thousands. How does one train that?
By using the circles of attention. It involves cultivating a mental bubble, a progressively expanding field of focus. You start with the small circle, just yourself, maybe a prop in your hand. Then the middle circle, the immediate scene partner and the furniture. Then the large circle, the whole stage and environment. The purpose is to create what is often described as a third wall around the performer, allowing them to focus entirely on the fictional environment.
So you block out the audience.
You block out the paralyzing self-consciousness of stage fright.
This sounds intensely intellectual and psychological, but the system is called the system of action. How does this deep internal work translate into external, observable movement?
This is the essential pivot. The system moves from internal feeling to external doing through the concept of tasks and action. Stanislavski claimed action was the very basis of our art.
Okay.
An actor's performance is driven by the pursuit of a sequence of tasks.
What defines a task?
A task, sometimes called an objective, is a concrete, actionable problem embedded within the given circumstances that the character must solve right now. Crucially, it must be framed actively.
So you don't try to feel love.
You try to persuade the other person to forgive you. You don't display anger. You try to make the other person leave the room.
It shifts the actor's focus from passive display, I am sad, to active striving. I need to make the other person do this specific thing.
Exactly. This striving is the birthplace of genuine emotion. To manage this sequence, Stanislavski organized the script into discrete units he called bits.
And we should clarify here, the term beat is a common mistranslation, right?
It is, according to the sources, most likely a mistranslation. Stanislavski's students pronounce bit with a heavy Russian accent, and it just sort of stuck as beat in English pedagogy.
So we should be thinking of action units as bits. How do we define the boundaries of a bit?
A bit is defined by the length of a single, coherent task, and it ends at a reversal point. Reversal point is a significant revelation, a major decision or realization that fundamentally alters the direction of the action.
So a character's task might be to obtain the key.
And they succeed. That's a reversal point. The next task immediately becomes to flee the room.
The task, then, functions as the ultimate psychological shortcut.
It is the decoy for feeling. That's Stanislavski's fantastic, memorable phrase. You don't try to feel the emotion. You pursue the task. The task must be so imaginatively engaging that it acts as a magnet, stimulating the actor's inner impulses.
And the feeling follows the action.
The feeling of anxiety follows the urgency of the task. I must convince the guards I am innocent before the clock strikes. The emotion is the byproduct of the doing.
And when you string these urgent tasks together, one objective leading naturally to the next, you form the character's trajectory.
Which is the through line of action. This through line binds all the discrete bits and tasks into an unbroken continuum of experience, giving the performance organic unity and dramatic momentum.
Leading to the ultimate goal.
Leading to the highest objective of the entire drama, the super task or super objective.
So for Chekhov's three sisters, the super task might be something like to find a meaningful life in Moscow.
Yes, and every smaller task, selling the house, getting a job, pursuing a romance, must align with that super task. It provides purpose and consistency, preventing the performance from becoming just a random collection of emotional moments.
What's fascinating here is that Stanislavski didn't stop once he had this brilliant psychological framework in place. He continued to evolve his methods, particularly after 1916. This later phase came to be known as the method of physical action. It seems contradictory. Why move away from the mind back to the body?
The shift was pedagogical. It was driven by efficiency, not rejection. The earlier emphasis on purely psychological techniques was often unreliable, difficult to repeat, and sometimes psychologically draining for the actors.
So he was looking for a faster way in.
A more immediate and universal entry point into the work. The method of physical action, which he explored practically in the early 1930s, was the answer.
And how did this change the rehearsal room dynamic? If they weren't sitting at a table analyzing subtext, what were they doing?
They minimized those long, intellectual, at-the-table discussions. They favored active analysis. This meant they immediately jumped into action and began improvising the sequence of dramatic situations required by the script.
So they were prioritizing movement and physical commitment. Was the expectation that the emotional and intellectual understanding would arrive during the physical movement?
Absolutely. The foundational quote for this period is, "The best analysis of a play is to take action in the given circumstances." Stanislavski realized that by physically committing to the actions required by the script walking, fighting, sitting, interacting with props, the internal life would be evoked naturally.
So if I walk with a character's gait, eventually I begin to feel the character's weariness. The physical dictates the psychological.
Precisely. Stanislavski argued that in the process of action, the actor gradually obtains the mastery over the inner incentives, evoking in himself the emotions and thoughts which resulted in those actions. It's a pragmatic recognition that the body is often a less resistant pathway to truth than the hyper-analytical mind.
This is the source of the persistent misconception, right? That the method of physical action was a total rejection of all the earlier psychological work.
It is the most critical misunderstanding, and one that caused major damage when the system traveled west. Stanislavski's ultimate goal was psychophysical integration, a holistic approach.
He wasn't throwing anything out.
Never. He was completing the circle. He saw the actor's mind and body as an integrated continuum, capable of exploring character both inside out, starting with feeling, and outside in, starting with action.
He understood that inspiration can strike from either direction.
Exactly. When working on Argan in The Imaginary Invalid in 1913, he observed that a character is sometimes formed psychologically, but at other times it is discovered through purely external exploration. He found that leading with action was often less psychologically damaging.
Less dangerous for the actor.
Far less. He even started advising students who are heavily reliant on intense emotional techniques to quickly shake off the character after rehearsals, concerned about the potential mental problems.
Now, to prove the universality of this newly integrated system, he applied it to the most stylized, artificial art form imaginable: opera. That seems like an acid test for psychological truth.
It was a fascinating laboratory. He founded the Opera Studio in 1918. Opera is defined by high artifice people singing their lines, often in a foreign language.
With grand gestures.
Yet Stanislavski insisted that if his system could psychologically ground the performance of opera singers, it was truly universal. This is where he significantly developed the notion of tempo rhythm.
That term is often thrown around casually, but what does tempo rhythm actually mean within the integrated system?
It's the synchronization of the external speed of the movement, which is the tempo, with the internal psychological pace, which is the rhythm.
So the inner and outer have to match.
They must align. If a character is internally grieving a slow psychological rhythm, but they are frantically racing around the stage, a fast external tempo, they are psychologically false.
So if a character is deeply depressed but has to walk quickly to catch a train, their movement might still be fast, but their rhythm, the internal quality of the weight, must reflect the depressive state.
Precisely. It's about the emotional resonance of the speed. He wanted the tempo rhythm of the acting to match the music, creating a unified sensory and psychological experience for the audience.
So by the end of his life, what did the complete unified training curriculum look like?
His final course at the Opera Dramatic Studio, which ran from 1935 to 1938, is considered his most complete pedagogical statement, his true testament.
A 4-year course.
A rigorous 4-year curriculum focused entirely on method and technique, and it formalized the two sides of his integration. The first 2 years were dedicated to the material in an actor's work on himself, the inner work, imagination, concentration, emotion, memory.
All the psychological stuff.
Right. And the latter 2 years were dedicated to an actor's work on a role, applying the system to text, using the method of physical action, analyzing the through line, and discovering the supertask.
The structure itself proves his point.
It confirms unequivocally that the physical method was never a replacement, but the other half of the integrated whole.
Stanislavski's ideas became, without question, the dominant influence on Western acting debates, particularly after his death. His ideas traveled to the United States primarily through a wave of former students who left Russia after the revolution.
We have to name them, as they were the intellectual carriers. Richard Boleslavsky, Maria Uspenskaya, and notably Stanislavski's brilliant nephew, Michael Chekhov.
And they founded some major schools.
Incredibly influential institutions, most importantly, the American Laboratory Theater, or the Lab, which modeled itself directly on Stanislavski's experimental first studio.
So the system arrived in America, but it didn't land as a unified whole. It arrived fractured, leading to the creation of the infamous American Method. Where did the split begin?
It began with a heavy emphasis on the psychological techniques taught in the earlier stages of the system, particularly the concept of emotion memory.
Lee Strasberg.
Lee Strasberg, who co-founded the group theater in 1931 and later taught at the Actors Studio, championed this approach. For Strasberg, the central task was harnessing the actor's personal history, recalling powerful emotional experiences from their own life to stimulate an analogous feeling.
The idea being that an authentic personal memory generates an authentic stage emotion.
Yes, and Strasberg became the great proponent of this intense, psychologically inward work. But this focus led directly to what our sources call the pivotal conflict of 1934.
Okay, what happened?
The group theater was struggling with consistency, and Stella Adler, another key member, decided to bypass the American teachers and go straight to the source. She traveled to Paris to study intensely with Stanislavski himself.
She was seeking help for a block she was facing in her own performance, and Stanislavski must have been deep into his later method of physical action by this time.
He was, and her finding was a bombshell she brought back to New York. Adler was astonished to discover that Stanislavski had largely rejected emotion memory, except as a last resort. He explained to her that it was unreliable, highly taxing, and could be detrimental to an actor's mental health.
He had moved past it.
He had. He strongly recommended the indirect pathway to emotion, starting with physical action and rooting the emotion truthfully in the given circumstances using the magic if, rather than relying on dredging up past trauma.
And how did Strasberg respond to the news that his entire core technique had been dismissed by the master?
He angrily rejected the news, refused to modify his approach. He continued to champion emotion memory as the cornerstone of the method.
Why?
He believed Stanislavski, by shifting to physical action, was capitulating to the demands of the Soviet state's ideology dialectical materialism and abandoning the true psychological work.
So right there, the American method splits permanently into two major strands: Strasberg's psychological intensity and Adler's emphasis on imagination and action.
Exactly. Adler's strand, the one aligned with Stanislavski's final emphasis, went on to influence screen titans like Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro, who emphasized character research and commitment to action.
And we also see a third major branch emerge from the group theater lineage: Sanford Meisner.
Meisner also recognized the need for a reliable pathway. He focused heavily on Stanislavski's concepts of communication and adaptation.
The Meisner technique.
Yeah, the Meisner technique, yeah. It centers on the idea of living truthfully under imaginary circumstances by emphasizing repetition exercises designed to eliminate intellectual thinking and force the actor to truly listen and react spontaneously to their scene partner moment to moment.
So it's behavioral.
It's often characterized as the behavioral strand.
So we have the core of the American method dominated by three distinct, almost warring schools. Strasberg prioritizing intense psychological feeling via memory.
Adler prioritizing research and sociological imagination via action.
And Meisner prioritizing behavioral truth via spontaneous interaction.
And Carnegie's analysis nails the tragedy of this fragmentation. She argues that Stanislavski's dynamic, integrated psychophysical approach was turned into rigid dogma by these warring camps. Each camp proclaimed itself the holder of the only true method, obscuring the fact that Stanislavski viewed his work as a unified whole with multiple points of entry.
Because Stanislavski himself, even in his final manuals, refused to eliminate any path entirely. He included everything.
He did. He understood actors are different people and respond to different stimuli. Even when teaching his final directing students, he stressed, one must give actors various paths. One of these is the path of action. There is also another path. You can move from feeling to action, arousing feeling first.
So both were valid entry points for him.
The final manuals include action, if, and given circumstances, right alongside emotion, memory, imagination, and communication. The system was comprehensive. The legacy became restrictive.
The American tradition, particularly Strasberg's, tended to overemphasize the psychological, while the Soviet tradition, under state pressure, sometimes minimized it.
And the true Stanislavski, the integrated psychophysical genius, was lost in translation and political ideology for decades. The irony is that the true method, the one that requires using the body to evoke the mind and the mind to inform the body, was always the most sustainable, repeatable, and complete system.
This deep dive has shown us how Stanislavski took theater from an era of declamatory shouting and external display, transforming it into a precise, systematic pursuit of psychological truth. From the invention of subtext to the integration of the body and mind, his methodology truly underpins everything we consider good performance today.
On stage and on screen.
Whether it's the subtlety of Chekhov on stage or the raw, visceral presence of a character on screen.
And as we reflect on the pursuit of this perfect psychological truth, we should consider a critique leveled at the system even in Stanislavski's own time. The Russian novelist Mikhail Bulgakov, whose play The White Guard was successfully directed by Stanislavski.
He satirized him, didn't he?
He satirized the whole process in his novel Black Snow, a classic roman à clef, where the director's intense exercises take over the rehearsal process.
Bulgakov's characterization of the director, based on Stanislavski, is famously tyrannical, isn't it?
He is, and Bulgakov shows the playwright becoming terrified that his own script is being lost because the acting exercises, the psychotechnique, are taking such precedence.
He's worried that acting is overshadowing the play.
The playwright's ultimate fear was that the director's theories would lead the audience to become so deeply absorbed in the reality and the truthfulness of the performance, the actor's inner life, that they would completely forget about the story, structure, and thematic content of the play itself.
That raises a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If the actor achieves perfect, authentic truthfulness, what is the ultimate relationship between that truth and the playwright's script? Where does the actor's inner life serve the text? And where might the mesmerizing reality of the performance accidentally swallow the dramatic work whole?
It's the tension between artistry and craft, a discussion that still defines the boundary between good acting and great drama today.
We encourage you to watch media this week and see if you can spot the difference between an actor who is clearly experiencing the role living truthfully moment to moment and one who might be merely representing it with external flourishes. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Stanislavski's revolutionary system. We'll talk to you next time.